language. And it finally dawned on me, well, the reason that there's these people that are reaching beyond that their comfort zone on a weekly basis on the internet using words that changed from week to week, but basically the conversation was the same. The reason they were doing that was because of some kind of external input, if you will, some kind of
Hmm.
external aggravation or irritation that they were attempting to express. And that's when I determined, oh, I see what's going on. These humans are actually psychic, and they don't know they're psychic, and they're sitting around or standing around there thinking, and they're reacting to inputs that they can probably not sense in any meaningful way, but that they nonetheless must express, and here's how they're doing it. Instead of using the same 12,000 words to talk about their bread baking or their gardening or their sewing or whatever, they're reaching out far beyond that 20,000 barrier into the upper ends of the 100,000 that they know. One of the things that tumbled me to this was how people used words in constructions that were slightly inappropriate, which was easy to pick out with early grammar hunting software that I'd developed.
Okay.
And so I got this idea that, well, why are they putting themselves to this trouble when last week they essentially had the same conversation with, Susie Q that they're now having with Betty Frank, and they are you basically describing the same situation, only now they're using slightly different words. And it was because of that psychic pressure, that pressure from universe to say something is different now and you need to express it. And when they did express it, they would hunt for those words beyond the 20,000. I was able to pick them up. And it finally, universe slapped me upside the head and said, okay, here's what's going on. They're actually psychic and something's going to occur. And then I got the prototypical light bulb over my head and all of that kind of stuff. And I thought, I wonder what you could do if you could collect all of these psychic impressions and distill them down into a thick, syrupy mass. Wouldn't that be of value? And then I went on from there.
Okay, great, and that's fascinating. I've always had the same belief too. I think it's awesome that someone created it. Now, you scanned the internet to find the language, correct?
Correct.
Now, do you use any website, or do you use particularly forums, or is there a certain way that you shoot at it, or is it the
Okay, and it's evolved over time. Initially, we started off in the early days of the internet. It was had been just released into the wild by DARPA, and in fact, in like 1981 or so, when I was working for a phone company, also doing software on large projects, one of my tasks was to get the first set of IP addresses permanently assigned that were allocated to anybody in Washington State that was not military.
hmm,
And so I had to get these and distribute them among phone companies and so on as the internet was starting to really get moving. So I've been involved with the original DARPA net all the way back to probably 79.
okay?
But anyway, so the internet had just been released out in the wild. And in those days, mostly it was a controlled environment in the sense that the only way you ever got access to it was through a phone company or through the military or some known portal. So there was no real worries about hackers or in any form of mischief.
Right.
Okay, so there was this concept called robots.txt. And all the servers then, most of them were running on Unix or Guardian, which is a tandem platform favored by the phone companies, and a few of the other major operating systems. And basically, all of these, there would be a file at the root level called robots.txt that had permissions for everybody to see. And you would examine this robot.txt file and see if you had permission to load your software on their machine. Because computing resources were so highly constrained, and because our desktops were such puny little guys that frequently had 6 and 10K of RAM. I mean, we're talking early days.
Right.
You would whenever you were doing anything of a larger nature, you would move your software from server to server to server. So initially, what I would do is I had all these C routines and early form of Perl script routines available, and I would load them from one server to the next and sweep all of that server basically, and then go on to the next server and so on. So at that point, I was grabbing whatever was publicly available to me on that machine, which could have been their email storage. There weren't forums per se at that point.
Okay.
There were some replicas of the what they emerged from, which is the old BBS system that used to exist, which probably predates most of the listeners. But in any event, so initially that's what it started off with. As it has morphed over time, we now find ourselves concentrating on Chat cluster repositories. We never mess with emails anymore just because it's way too much problem to get involved, and there are actually a lot more filtering involved in that than anything else, especially with all the spam.
Hmm.
But these days we find ourselves reading all the public pages, the blogs, the comments that are on blogs, and forums, and then responses to and replies to all the messages.
Okay.
Basically in that order. Um, there does not appear to be, insofar as we've been able to analyze, and I've never run the test to really determine it down to the gnat's ass, but there doesn't appear to be any favored sub-media there for us getting more accurate predictions, say, out of uh, uh, text logs than over forum chat. Anything we pick up, it all goes into the same thick syrupy mass. When we do differentiate, it doesn't really seem to depend on where we read, so there's no point in concentrating on one more than the other.
Okay, that makes sense. And at what point along the way did you realize that what you'd created was starting to make accurate predictions as to what would happen? What was the big
That
moment
was
where it started working?
97.
Okay.
Yeah, that was early 97. It took me a number of years to get the whole system together because first I had to write a whole group of software chunks that we call the spiders that go out and find this stuff. And they had to morph over time because the internet grew very rapidly. So in 93, I could let them loose on servers, but by 2003, that was way forbidden. And really, that had started to fade by 98. And so we're constantly screwing around with the spiders at that stage to refine our gathering technique. But in 97, I did a very large run. I ran the data spiders from about June of 1996 all the way through to late December of 96. It took there wasn't as much internet for one, and so it took a lot longer to get the same volumes of text that we were dealing with.
Right.
Bear in mind that I had just come from an environment that was phone companies, and then when I was working for the phone companies, we were processing hundreds of millions of records at a time. So that was the quantity I was thinking of, that I needed to have that kind of mass. Maybe it's not necessary. I just started off that way, and I've never changed, so I don't know. But in any event, I figured more was better, and so I ran it for 6 months, and then I sat there started doing the interpretation in probably November of that year of 96. And it wasn't until probably early March or so of 97 that I actually had what we would think of as a report where I had all the data interpreted and had started to make some conclusions. And that was when I had my oh shit moment.
Okay, great. And I guess before we go into what you see coming through the WebBot in 2011, I just want to ask you personally, what is your own opinion as to what it is that makes humans just a little bit psychic? What's the source of that? Do you have
Oh,
any
it's
clue?
it's sure. It's actually patently evident. My viewpoint of reality is that reality is not materially solid. That the idea that one atom could ever touch another atom is a fiction that borders on absurdity.
Hmm.
And that in fact, all of reality that is manifest, A, is inside your head. There's nothing that is manifest in reality that is outside of your consciousness, nothing physically away from you. And B, that we're all basically standing waves of energy
Okay.
that collect. And thus, since we are a standing wave of energy that thinks itself a solid being simply because its consciousness can't think beyond 60 frames a second, and reality as an energetic source is manifesting on the order of trillions of times a second, and so we think it is solid. But because we're a standing energy wave, we form what is known as an energetic antenna. And basically, we're like very complex, highly sophisticated versions of propagating, self controlling to some extent, and self energizing harps in the sense of HARP, the big monster project in
Right.
Alaska. Okay, we're a standing energy wave that walks through other energy waves. So, duh, we pick up these other energy waves as we truck about. And it just takes a while for it to penetrate into our consciousness, which is bound to the grosser material, thicker world, and therefore doesn't see itself as energy and can't really consciously pick up on the new energy coming in, but it must deal with it, so it forces it into the material world. And in my view,